Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the Startup Society's Foundation podcast. I'm Patrick Lamson Hall, and today we're joined by Massimo Mazzone, the founder and president of Grupo 3 and also the founder of Ciudad Morazán, one of two functioning ZEDEs currently being built in Honduras. Now, I should say at the beginning that my firm, Fitted Projects, was involved in the urban plan for Ciudad Morazán. So we refer to that a bit in the podcast, and I just put it out there to be transparent about any conflicts of interest. So I hope you enjoy the podcast, and thank you.
My name is Massimo Mazzone. I am an Italian national, but I've been living in Central America and especially Honduras for 20 years. I am an entrepreneur. My company main asset is the largest chain of pharmacies in the region, and I've been trying to set up a ZEDE, a Zona Económica de Desarrollo Especial, for maybe 10 years now, and I could finally do it last year.
Could you just, in case some of the listeners don't know fully what it is, could you just tell us a bit about what a ZEDE is?
Yeah. The ZEDE are a special economic zone with a degree of autonomy that is possibly the most advanced in any legislation in the world. The process of launching this legislation started 12 years ago with the intervention of an economist, Paul Romer, that later became a Nobel Prize winner. This is, as far as I know, the first example of a special economic zone that is owned by private people and not the government, and include residential people. You can find a lot of special economic zone owned by private individuals or company, but these are simply places to work, industrial park. And you can find a big special economic zone that includes a residential area, but they are like for example in Dubai or in China, but they are always owned by the state. As far as I know, it's the first example that private individual or company can manage a special economic zone with the residential people, because this implies a very delicate function. When you have residents, you have, of course, crime. So there is the issue of police and the judiciary, while usually there is not in an industrial park.
And what's the opportunity that's presented by being able to have residences and people living there versus just having it be about industry?
You have all the components of a society. So you have work, you have residents, you have commercial space, you have to provide infrastructure, churches, schools, hospital. So it's really a small segment of society, and the special economic zone has to provide all the governance of a typical city, small town in our case, because we, at least now, our objective is to get to 10,000 people. So it's a great opportunity to show that private individuals can provide this governance. And the big advantage is that if the owner doesn't have the problem of public choice schools. So the incentive of the owner and the incentive of the residents are pretty much aligned, especially if the special economic zone, like in our case, is configured as a proprietary community and not a subdivision. Subdivision is simply a zone in which the owner sells pieces of land, while in our case, we keep the ownership and we rent the space, being them department or houses or factory building, we keep ownership.
You, as the entrepreneur, will retain ownership over the community, kind of the model's kind of like a mall or something like that, yes, where you have the spaces. And for you, why do this project as a ZEDE instead of just setting up proprietary community that's not a ZEDE?
Well, the ZEDE allows a lot of advantage. The first is that the taxes that you raise in the ZEDE are used inside the ZEDE, or at least 88% of it. The law states that 12% of the tax take goes to the government to pay for example, for the army and for international protection, but 88 stay there and is used for the service that you have to provide to the city, to the residents. They are not citizens because it's part of Honduras. In this case, you can avoid waste and bring down the taxes substantially. In our case, the only tax we have, it's a 5% on income, but we do not have taxes on value added, like sales taxes, for example. We do not have property taxes, taxes on the death tax or other type of taxes, just 5% on income. And we believe we can provide most of the traditional welfare system with 5%, which of course it's a much less than the typical 40 or 50% of Western states.
When you talk about not having value-added taxes and things like that, does it imply that you have like a hard border with the rest of the country, or are there some places where you can go back and forth?
Well, the ZEDE has a wall by law because it's a duty-free zone. So to avoid smuggling, there is only one entrance. And at the entrance, there is an office of Honduran customs. Because, yes, it's possible for people living around to come and visit the place, for example, going to a restaurant or a bar. And they can also, for example, buy a television in the shop that sell electronics. But when they go out with the television, they are supposed to pay the duty and the SAV that applies in Honduras, because it's a duty-free zone. So I think this is completely logical and normal. If not, there would be a huge amount of smuggling. It's not only that the 5% of taxes mostly remain in the ZEDE, it's that the people living in the ZEDE do not pay any other taxes. So they do not pay income taxes to the government. It's like in the US, a state that doesn't, people in that state does not have to pay federal taxes, or at least, let's say that the 12% of the tax take of the state is transferred to the federal government. It is probably how it was the US between the Article of Federation and the Constitution.
How interesting. And when you started this project, I would love to know, like you said it took about 10 years that you've been trying to start one. So I'd love to know about the difficulties that you faced. I'd also love to know, like when you embarked upon it, what your goals were, and if your sense of those goals has changed over time as you've kind of gone down the rabbit hole.
No, the goal remained the same, which is, but first of all, to make money. I think the role of the entrepreneur is to find profitable solution to society problem, as the CEO of Google recently said. So you want to address a problem and making money with that. So the goal is to provide, in my particular case, we're developing the ZEDE in the heart of the Maquila area. Maquila is the labor-intensive light manufacturing area, mostly export in Honduras, where there are people that have a job but make very little money. The salary there is about $300 per month. And as in any emerging country with a special economic zone, when they opened the first special economic zone that created the Maquila, the city grew exponentially. Choloma, the place where which I am opening the ZEDE, used to have 20,000 people 20 years ago, and now the city has 300,000. It increased by 15 times in 20 years. And this means that the environment is very degraded from a social point of view, a lot of criminality, a lot of broken families, because the males goes to the US illegally, and so it's mostly single mother. Environmental is very degraded. You see open sewage everywhere. Roads are mostly non-paved. We have to be fair. I mean, even the best states like Sweden probably would have difficulties in managing such a growth. In states that have not a lot of state capacity, as it's common to say now, this problem is even more pronounced. So basically, we want to provide these people, I wouldn't call them poor, I would call them middle lower class, to provide them with a life, as you actually said when we were together, free of fear of being assaulted, mugged, raped, free of the fear of opening a shop and being extorted by maras, by the gangs, or free of having your kid roaming around in a bicycle because they can be recruited in a mara or killed by a shooting by, free of the danger of hurricanes or earthquakes that are common in our region. So to allow them to have, I mean, not a rich life, because at the end the productivity is still pretty low, but a life with dignity.
That's a pretty different model than other private cities that get built. I mean, the normal, we talked about this a little bit before the interview, like the normal model for a private city is to go high end, you know, to try to sell to international buyers or rich locals, and to really emphasize kind of the glitz and the glamour. You can see this at least in the marketing materials for the Prospera ZEDE. And so I'm curious why, when you saw this opportunity, like why you decided to take Ciudad Morazán in this direction of trying to meet the needs of the masses, more or less, rather than going for that more upscale approach.
I don't have absolutely nothing against Prospera, and I hope they will be very successful. But it's true, they are building something for rich, possibly libertarian types around the world, a little bit like a God culture of Atlas Shrugged. And I have nothing against that, and I think it's a commendable idea. But I happen to believe that freedom is something that is not only a human right, the basic human right, but it's also very useful to the poor. Actually, much more useful to the poor than the rich. It's useful also to the rich, and it's good also to the rich. But it's very important if you are poor and you wanna grow out of your poverty. There is nothing genetic about poverty in Honduras. They are Homo sapiens like everybody else. And you can see, if you look at the GDP per capita of the second generation of Honduran immigrants in the US, after two, or I think they get at the average at the third generation. But I mean, they pass from a GDP per capita of $2,500 to a GDP per capita of $50,000 per year, so 20 times more in 3 generations. And this is just because the environment, the institution, and also the culture, it's much better and more conducive to a prosperous life in the US than in Honduras. The idea is to provide these people the same opportunity that they would have in the US, but in their own countries. Now, of course, if there is liberty, if a person, let's say, that makes $300,000 per year, I believe that if it's in a freer place, even freer than the US, they can maybe make $400,000 or $500,000 without regulation, with less taxes, with better service. But I don't believe that they can do much more than double their GDP per capita, while the poor can increase from, as we said, by 20 times, or I hope even more, if we can give an institutional environment even better than the American one.
This idea of norms and governance, this is something that academics usually focus on when they're talking about the role of special jurisdictions. You know, the idea is that they create some kind of competition, or that they create areas where experimentation can occur. And personally, I think that that's vital. But the way that governments usually look at this is in terms of economic growth. So I'd love to know how you see it, because you are a business person, but also you have a very academic and intellectual mindset as to how you understand this problem. Are the main benefits going to come from the economic growth that you can achieve in this environment, or are the benefits going to come from modeling government reforms?
I think there will be a disproportionate benefits to the people living inside the ZEDE from institutional reason and also for cultural reason. We're going to be very careful about that, and I can tell you a little bit more about that. But it will also have a positive effect in the rest of Honduras. At the end of the day, we are part of Honduras. We have a pretty strong institutional defense, let's say, against changes in the law, because it's a constitutional law, and to make changes, it is required 2/3 of Congress. But we still are part of a sovereign state that can change the rules. And the only way we have to protect politically the project is, first of all, to provide, as I said, a disproportionate better life to people living inside the ZEDE, but also to provide positive externalities to the rest of the country. And I believe we'll do it, because we'll attract investments. We are putting investments ourselves, but our industrial tenants will provide new investments, a new job, hopefully more value-added jobs, and this will translate in more money for Choloma and for the rest of the country. Definitely, we have to execute. We cannot only talk about that, but we have to give something to our host country. I mentioned briefly institution and culture. I think this is an old discussion in development economics. If what is important is one or the other, I think they are both. Institution must be perfect, but it's relatively easy to implement those, because there are best practice in the world, so you just copy them. Culture is a little bit more difficult, but in this case, we'll have to be very strict in how we manage the ZEDE. In Honduras, there is a low level of social trust. So, just to give an example, littering, it's very common. Everybody litters, even people that would not like to litter. If you see the road that it's messed up with other people rubbish, of course they will litter too. So you have to start to be very strict, and you can do that if you're a proprietary community, because you can kick out the person that don't follow the rules and the norms. And so if a lady, for example, allow his kid to drop the paper of his ice cream, we go back and tell her, look, you cannot do that. And we'll do 2 or 3 times, and the 4th times will not renew the lease. when we believe that after a few years of this very strict application of rules, at that point, the norms will be internalized, and the residents will police will check each other. So it's like in Switzerland. If you go in Switzerland now, you don't drop a piece of paper because you're worried about the fine, but because everybody looks at you like, I mean, you're not a good person. So Ciudad Morazán, the name of the ZEDE, will actually be pretty strict, much more like Singapore than Hong Kong. Then maybe in the future, in 10 years, so we'll be able to have a much more laissez-faire environment inside the city. But at the very beginning, we have to create a culture. And you can do that only being extremely strict about rules.
One of the tactics that's used to help create a distinct culture is making it physically apparent that you're entering a different kind of place. So you talk about littering. What other things are you doing to make it physically distinct from other communities in Honduras, communities on the outside?
Well, I'm doing what you, Patrick, proposed with your urban plan. So you should answer this question. But as you know, we work a lot about drawing the urban plan so the residents can police each other. And of course, there will be rubbish collector everywhere. And so the city is designed as very elegant, very simple, not expensive because they do not have the money, but with broad avenues and a pleasant environment. So you can do something with the hardware, let's say, with the buildings and the urban plan. But then most of it is the selection of the people. You can do that only in a proprietary community, because one of the 4 advantages of a proprietary community is the conflict resolution. If I have a person that keeps music on all night, just 1 decibel lower than the maximum allowed, I don't care if he says it's 1 decibel less. If I think that is a nuisance to their fellow citizens, I will not renew his lease at the end of the month. So he will have to walk away. You cannot do that with a subdivision.
And how's it managed? You've talked about the rule enforcement, like you'll be doing it personally, but I guess there's some kind of an administrative apparatus.
Well, the ZEDE allows you to have a lot of leeway from a legal point of view. So we have our own private law. Criminal law must be the Honduran law, and the judges must be Honduran. But for example, private law, we can choose the law we want. I mean, in reasonable terms. I guess if we choose a Sharia, it would not be accepted by the government. In our case, we just chose a simplified version of the Honduran code. But for example, the judges in our case are arbitration courts. Then we have our labor law, we have our financial law, police law. So it's actually a big job to create all these law and governance teams and administrative people to manage a city. This is something that many libertarians, I think, subestimate when they say that the government is completely useless. My position is that it's definitely too expensive, but it covers functions that are necessary for human life. And in a private environment, you have to replicate. And these functions are really a lot. When you build a community, you realize how many small things we give for granted just because the state takes care of those.
Oh, That's a really interesting, point, and I appreciate that you would draw that contrast. I think it's easy to do these things in the abstract, and once you get, as they say, it's easy to confuse the map with the territory, right? So once you get into the weeds, maybe it becomes a little more complicated. So I would love to know also just more about how the project is going. I mean, the last time that we really spoke extensively about it was when I think I delivered the urban plan, which pertains to the tabula rasa, right? It's occurring in a vacuum, but we've had this incredible COVID year. A lot's changed around the world and in Honduras. How are things progressing?
Well, we finish the perimeter wall, then we finish the main road from the entrance to the industrial area. We brought electricity, building a 1.5 kilometer line from the substation of TNA, which is the state provider of electricity. We dig a well, and then we built the first 4,000 square meter, something like 40,000 square feet of industrial space, which is already rented to companies operating there. And we are now building the first 100 residencies, actually 86, because they're going to be 70 studios and 16 townhouses. They will be ready in 2 months. So this moment we have people working inside. I think we have about 20 people that are already working for companies under the institution of the ZEDE, so with the ZEDE law. We are importing and exporting, company based in the ZEDE are importing containers for all over the world and are also exporting them. But we do not have anybody living there because we do not have a housing solution yet, but we'll have it in a couple of months. Until now, we spent about $6 million, and it's just a scratch of the surface, because the ZEDE is 24 hectares, something like 60 acres. And to develop this phase, this 24 hectares, I estimate an investment of $100 million. This is a little bit the flip side of a proprietary community. It gives a lot of advantage, but has the big disadvantage that you cannot sell. So if you don't sell the land or the building, to recoup the investment, it takes a lot of time. Real estate is, of course, one of the most capital-intensive business that exists, and basically we have to finance everything ourselves.
And you said that you're trying to get to 10,000 residents. Right. How long do you think that'll take?
The bottleneck for the residential side is the availability of financing. The bottleneck for the industrial side is to see how the institutional framework works in reality. But I'm pretty optimistic. I have to say that the government has been helpful, and there is some resistance at the bureaucratic level, but the executive has been intervening pretty forcefully to make the law reality. So going back to your question, we have money possibly to develop this in 4 or 5 years. If the demand is really much higher at a price that makes sense, because there is a positive return on investment, we'll need to raise money. So we look from other investors, but we will never sell piece of land. We will attract investor in the shareholding of the owner, but the owner will always be a single one. So there is no need of politics.
And then what's going to keep Ciudad Morazán from eventually becoming a high-income place, or do you see that as a part of its future?
It's a great part. It's a great characteristic of this law. We can grow without asking for another permission. We can just buy other land, contiguous or not contiguous to the existing one, and just add just let them know, let the agency that supervise us, that is called CAMP, we have just to notify them that this land that we bought is now part of the ZEDE. As a matter of fact, we already bought 5 contiguous hectares, and we are in discussion for another 15. So if we close that, we basically increase the size from 24 to 40 hectares. So in an environment like that, and this is the second advantage of a proprietary community, is the flexibility of the use of real estate. It's very likely that the place where we are now building a low-income housing solution will become the center of the ZEDE, and it will be better used to more value-added application like office tower, for example. So in this case, we'll increase the size of the town. We will build new houses for low-income residents. We'll tell them, the people leasing now in the entrance, that we have at the same price new houses 2 kilometers away, and they will choose to move there, or if they don't want to move there, at the end of the lease, we simply cut the lease, destroy the house, and building a high-rise for office or for more value-added application. This is the second big advantage, together with the easiness of conflict resolution that proprietary community have. So going back to your question, yes, it's very likely that the ZEDE will have a rich side, a place with where people with higher income can live, but this doesn't imply that cannot have the place for the middle lower income too.
This is what I really like about your model, because I think at the root of it is a more developed understanding of what an actual urban community is and the kinds of benefits and spillovers that you get from that. Again, you're going against like the popular model, not even in terms of being a subdivision, but in terms of saying, look, I'm willing to tolerate in some way the chaos that comes with having different people pursuing their own individual activities within this space. What do you see as the trade-offs that are there? Or do you think it, I mean, do you think it will have some difficulties as well? And what do you see those as being?
Well, every city are, as Ferguson said about society, the product of human action, but not human design. It's the interaction of, in our case, tens of thousands individuals that make the city. And so you cannot be so arrogant to think that you know better than them what is the best for them. So the city usually grow spontaneously. So in these terms, the urban plan that you created for us, it's a good blueprint. It was important to give to the government to have credibility. But I don't think that in 5 years, the city will be exactly like your plan, because it will depend on the demand. We'll have more demand for residential solution or industrial solution, or we'll see the application. Maybe these studios we are building of 25 square meters will be used by 4 workers that share the place together. So in that case, we'll need to figure out a solution with even less space, maybe a room of 10 square meters with common toilet, because this is what the market look for. We don't know. Our job is to be less arrogant. We can listen to the market, understand, and often it's not the open request of the market. It's just the way people use the real estate that makes us to understand what they really would like to, and to provide the solution more adapted, as much as possible, adapted to their needs.
Like, if I'm understanding it correctly, the opportunity that the ZEDEs has offered is for you to try this new model, something that would have been difficult for you to do without access to the ZEDE. And if the model works, it's easy for you to scale. Is that
Yeah.
more or less? So
Yeah.
this seems like it would be attractive to a lot of people. You mentioned, obviously, we know about the Prospera ZEDE. You mentioned one other. Do you think that more people are going to jump in on this? I mean, are more ZEDEs coming, in your opinion?
I think there is a lot of people that wish to open other ZEDE, and they are just looking how Prospera us and these other guys will be doing, because we have to be frank. We are an environment, Honduras, in which politics is very, very important, and the rule of law is not as strong as in other countries. So, by the way, we are under election now. In November, there will be the national election, and you can never say that the next president and Congress will follow the direction of the previous one. So they can, it's very easy that they can decide to squash the project. Now, we have, as I said, we have some legal defense, but at the end, it's a political issue. And in this sense, the best defense for us is to have, as soon as possible, as many residents as we can, and to give them a great life. So they will defend politically with the ballot and with manifestation. They will defend their right to live in the ZEDE. So I think there is a lot of people that would like to do that, and I really invite them to do that. But they are kind of worried and wants to see some more time and some more water under the bridges before committing what is, for the standard of Honduras, a significant amount of money. By the way, if I can, Patrick, I mentioned that I invite them to do that, because I believe that only an ecosystem of ZEDE can provide freedom. If there is only one or two ZEDEs, yes, they're an option more compared to the governance, the traditional governance provided by the state. But to be effective, there must be competition. If there is no competition, I won't have the need to continuously improve service and decrease cost. And it's only competition that makes a product better day after day. So the ZEDE system will work only if we will have 15, 20 ZEDE, hopefully 100, but not 2. We need more ZEDE.
That's a really interesting interpretation, especially in a context like Honduras, where so many of the essential goods and services are controlled by a small number of companies. I mean, it's a country that's kind of famously elite captured. Do you think that the way the legislation is structured now protects against elite capture? Does it encourage that ecosystem to develop?
Well, the legislation is there and it's working till now. Now, I don't know with the next Congress or the following Congress. So again, we have to solidify the roots of the ZEDE environment, providing benefits to the people living in the ZEDE and the people outside. At the end, law, I mean, politics always trumps law. So if the people are not happy, or if the politician will convey in some way that the people are not happy, they will shut us down.
Massimo, thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure speaking to you. I think this is a great project and we're all excited to see it succeed.
Thank you, Patrick. You are not only a nice host, but you are one of the father of the project, because you draw the urban planning. We learn a lot from you. So thanks again.